Everybody, I hope you've enjoyed your morning so far. As a participant, I really enjoyed everything that I've had a chance to partake in. A couple of things here. One, I'm going to step a little off script for a moment, and I want to shout out to those three at the office, Kirk, Gary, and Kim. They've put together a great event, and virtual conferences are still fairly new. I know they've been practicing, but I've come to figure out that it's no less work for them to do this virtually than it is in a hotel with conference rooms. It certainly looks and feels different, but the amount of effort put into making sure it comes off smoothly is no less. So I applaud them, and I know we all appreciate their hard work. The sessions today have been terrific. Just so you know, if anybody attended Hal Bowman's second session and you weren't able to access the evaluation, that link has been repaired. So go back if you were in that session and try it again. At this point, let's step back and reflect on the primary reason that we all started in our chosen field, to educate students. I'd now like to introduce our closing speaker for today, Paul Andersen. Paul is an educational consultant and YouTube creator living in Bozeman, Montana. He's an experienced educator, having taught science in Montana for 20 years. Paul was the 2011 Montana Teacher of the Year and was among the 4 finalists for the 2011 National Teacher of the Year. In addition to teaching, Paul has created hundreds of YouTube science tutorials that have been viewed millions of times by students around the world. Paul has provided training for meaningful professional development that can be applied immediately in the classroom. While we engage in this session, let's consider how we support our teachers to offer the best practices of remote instruction to educate our Montana students. Take it away, Paul.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you, Dale. And thank you, Kirk and Sam and everybody there. It's a little daunting. I've got a couple of my former bosses who are on here. So Kirk was my superintendent. Rob Watson was my superintendent. So it's a little daunting, but fun to be back. And thanks for joining me today. I wanted to start. This is that awkward time when I try to figure out how to properly share my screen. So let's try that. So can you guys see my screen? Give me a thumbs up if you can see it, like Dale, Kim, perfect, Kirk, awesome. And so welcome today, welcome. It looks like I'm competing against lunch, which is always hard. So thanks for sticking with me as we go through today. Today I want to talk about how I'm teaching remotely. My name is Paul Andersen. You can find me on Twitter if you want to kind of reach out and connect. But what I'm going to talk about is how I'm teaching remotely. One thing I think some teachers don't realize, and administrators as well, is that this is our new classroom. So like Zoom is your classroom. And so you have to reinvent yourself in this new classroom. And so today I'm going to be talking about teaching and how I'm teaching remotely, but I'm going to pivot through 3 different roles. And so I'm going to start in presenter mode. Right now I'm in presenter mode. You can tell I'm in presenter mode because I got my slides up and I'm talking. I'm going to quickly pivot into teacher mode. And when I go into teacher mode, you're going to be my students today. And so a lot of us, as we're starting to figure out how does remote teaching work, we don't have a good model of what that looks like. And so I'm looking into these people's faces right now. I'm looking at you, Dale. I'm looking at you, Kim, Kirk. I can see your face. I'm looking at Courtney. Courtney, I've been looking at your face all day, trying to figure out like, what is that logo behind you? Dan and Cal, and I'm thinking about all of you guys today. Molly, I'm looking at Erica Dowd. I'm not sure where Erica is, but Erica's been like super engaged today. And so you're going to be my student for a little bit. And I hope you're picking up on what I'm doing there. This is our new classroom. And it's really easy for you to just be a talking head, locked inside a little video, and there's no interaction between the two of us. And so what I want from you is I want you to be an animated listener. I don't want you to just turn video off and go do your email or do something else. Like I want you to be engaged with me today. And one of the ways that I can do that is just by calling you out and give you shout outs by name. And know this, like Kirk, I'm watching you, Kirk, this whole time. And I'm looking for feedback back from you. And what he does when he gives me a thumbs up like that is so helpful. It just kind of keeps me rolling. A lot of you probably know this sign. It's in sign language. This is maybe the most important like sign you can use on Zoom. What does this mean? This means I agree with what you're saying, or I agree with what you're doing. And that's super helpful for me when I'm going through and trying to present some of these slides. So I'm going to pivot in 3 different roles. I'll start as presenter, Then I'm going to be your teacher for a little bit to show you what remote teaching looks like. And then I want to be your peer. And so as we get to the end, I really want to leave enough time so we can have a little bit of question and answer at the end, some of that dialogue. It's easy on a conference like this for you to just feel lost, like you're not a part of it because we're not physically there together. And that's something we need to fight against. I want to start with a little bit of science. This is a famous science demonstration, comes from Harvard Medical School. And what they did is they built a massive Petri dish. And on this Petri dish, to give you a sense of the size, it's about 2 feet long on one side and then 4 feet long on the other side. And what they did is they built these little wells. And so on either side, there's no antibiotic. And so the bacteria can grow in there really well. But what they did is as we moved towards the center of this Petri dish, they started to add antibiotics, enough to kill all of the bacteria, and then 10 times the amount, and then 100 times the amount, and then 1,000 times the amount. And so essentially they're laying out this gauntlet that bacteria are going to have to work their way through if they want to survive. And then they just released bacteria on the sides. And let's take a look at what happened then. And so this is a time lapse, but what happens is the bacteria started to grow on either side, but then they hit this limit until eventually a mutation shows up, a new idea, and that spreads throughout all of the bacteria and they fill in that area. Then they hit another constraint, there's more mutations that take place, and over time, what we get bacteria doing is that they're eventually becoming resistant to all those forms of antibiotic. Now, what's interesting about that is all of these bacteria, for the most part, come from that first 1 or 2 mutations that allow them to survive over time. And so what I want to use that is a metaphor for what's happening with COVID. And so schools closed in March. And for all of you, I'm sure your job got exponentially harder. Like, how do we take all of this things that we're doing in the classrooms, and then how do we move that remotely? But then you hit another constraint. How do we give true instruction and curriculum in a remote setting? And then we had to figure out how are we going to do assessments and how are we going to do reporting? And the one thing I have to tell you that teachers are paranoid about is launching new classes. They're really nervous about going back to school in the fall where they haven't built those relationships that we built when we were back in March. And so I want to briefly tell you a story about my career, and I'll keep it brief. I started teaching 26 years ago in Guilford, Montana. If you know Guilford, Montana, give me a thumbs up. I'm not seeing much thumbs coming from people. Oh, I do. Oh, thank you. So this was KG High School, doesn't exist anymore. So it was another consolidated district. In my 26 years of teaching, there was only one disruption that I saw in my career. One thing that changed the profession overnight, and that was the internet. It literally changed education overnight. It allowed me in a rural school to connect to teachers all around the world and then to share information with teachers all around the world. And so what did I do? I love sharing knowledge. And so I started a YouTube channel called Bozeman Science because I lived in Bozeman. And so I started delivering lectures online. I'm coming up on almost 1 million subscribers in the next few weeks. And so it gives you a sense of how large the internet is and how much you can transform what you're doing. Now, me sharing my information is not what changed me. Me connecting to other people is what changed me. And so that was a huge disruption. The other, what it allowed me to do was essentially work with schools. For those of you who haven't seen me in the last 6 years, I've been a consultant for the last 6 years, working with schools all around the world. I'm working with schools as they implement a new set of science standards. So it's built around inquiry. And so my job has changed radically from me teaching back in Guilford. But we've had another disruption take place, and that is this virus. I would argue that this is going to be something we look back on 10 or 15 years from now, and it's literally going to have changed what's going on in education, hopefully for the better. Every time there is struggle, every time there's constraint, we can have new innovations that can come out of that. So 10 years ago, people who know me know that I was arguing 10 years ago that we need to use technology and we need to do blended learning, where we're leveraging the power of technology with what we're doing in the classroom to make our classrooms better. And some teachers did that. I was a part of the whole flip movement, blended classroom movement, but a bunch of teachers just didn't do anything because they were worried about the technology. They were worried about like learning new tools. Hey, guess what? All of those people know how to use Zoom now. All of those teachers know how to use technology now. And so we have to kind of start to leverage that. I became unemployed. And so I went from being a consultant with 2 years of like a waiting list to like, now I'm unemployed. School shut down. All my work next year will have to be virtual. And so I had to reinvent myself again. What did I learn back in March? I learned that I was horrible in presenting in Zoom. I didn't know how to do it. It ended up just being a webinar of me talking, and then I didn't get any feedback from the people that I was talking to. And so I've had to reinvent who I am as a teacher. I also launched a new website called My Learning Spot, where I'm delivering professional learning. So I had to reinvent my career. So all summer, I've been giving professional learning or professional development to teachers all around the world on how to do remote teaching. And so I really can share with you today, like what's working, what's not working. That's kind of what I want to spend time on. And so if we think about these models, which you're probably all talking about, some variety of models we'll use this year, the hardest one to get to is remote teaching. Like the hardest one to get to is from moving away from face-to-face to remote. And I want to be really clear on this. Remote teaching is not online teaching. Those are different things. We've done online instruction, we've done online teaching for the last 25 years. I got my master's in online program. What we're doing now is not that. What we're doing now is remote teaching, and remote teaching is different. What does remote teaching mean? We're all in different places. We would love to be together, but we can't. So like Kirk's SAM conference, this virtual conference is remote learning. Like we all want to be together in one spot, but we can't be. So we're all going to get on at the same time. Like if this is really just an online workshop, you just could have put up a bunch of webinars and we could watch them wherever we're doing that. And so like that's what we want to move towards is remote teaching. And a lot of people don't know what a good remote classroom looks like. And so a remote classroom, I was in a bunch of them that were horrible this spring. Like what does a horrible remote classroom look like? It's the Zoom where it's deadly quiet and no one's talking. And it's just awkward. And the kids aren't really on, they're probably on their phone doing something else. Like, let me show you the best remote classroom that I found this spring. And this was in Virginia. And these were kids that were coming together with a ton of support from teachers to share their common work around science and passion projects they had around their science projects. What can you see in this picture? They're all happy. And they're all smiling and they're all excited to be there. Now, if you're ever going on a Zoom conference like this, there's two modes you can be in. You can be in speaker mode or you could be in gallery mode. And so today when Dale was talking, I was in gallery mode, just looking at a lot of people as you were engaging in his workshop. And so this would be one thing that I found is that as I move to the right side in gallery mode, the way Zoom works is that if you don't have your video turned on, it just has your name. And so there was page after page of people who just have their name up there. I blotted it out. I'm not trying to call you out, but like if you're learning in a classroom, the worst thing to do is just not engage. And so right now, if your video is turned off, like I don't know who you are and I don't know what you're doing. So let me show you what it should look like. So these are people today in the workshop that I would call engaged in remote learning. These people have their video on. They're not distracted or doing something else, but they're looking at the presenter and trying to engage with what the presenter is doing. Now, it took me a lot of creepy like screenshotting to get enough videos of you guys smiling at the same time. And what makes this hard, Dale's now smiling. What makes it hard is like, if we were in the same classroom right now, like we would have all of that interaction, that interpersonal stuff. But since the Zoom sits between us, we have to start doing that and start breaking those things down. And so could you help me out for a second? Could you find the chat? So what I want you to do is find the chat. If you haven't used Zoom very much, it's going to be at the bottom. But what I'd like you to do is, for a second, could you tell me, what do you think one element of good remote teaching is? And I'd like everybody to engage in this. So in the chat, could you give me at least one element of good remote teaching? So Alex said it's connection, and Ty says it's engagement. Dale says it's engagement as well, and Justin says that it's good energy from everyone. Rob Watson says that it has to do with the interaction that we have between people. Cami Knapp, I just missed hers because it's going so fast. I'm seeing interaction from Brad, from Clint, from Sherry, also connections to other people. Full engagement, Martha says. Corey is talking about back and forth conversations. So I hope you're picking up on what I'm doing. Like, I'm not only reading it, but I'm also picking up and calling out the names. I've been giving you shout outs to try to like bring you into the conversation. Tom Peck says it's collaboration. Karen Lee says it's students talking to each other and not just the instructor talking. Like, Karen, that's such a good point. Like, teaching is not talking. Like, a good way to figure out who's learning in any classroom is the person who's talking. And guess who the person is who's talking right now? Like me. I'm the only one who's learning right now if you're not talking. Now, what I would do at this point, and we're not set up to do it right now, but I would push you into breakout rooms. Like, that would be the point to do this as a teacher. I would send you into breakout rooms. I'd put you 5 to a group. And what I would say is, when you go into the breakout rooms, what I want you to do is introduce yourselves to them, decide on some roles, who's going to be the timekeeper, who's going to be the facilitator. And then what I want you to do is, as a group, in the next, we could say 10 minutes, I want you to come up with your 5 points of good remote instruction. Like, that's what good remote instruction would look like. Breaking you apart so you could all talk a little bit, and then we could come back again. Like, one thing that like ties all good classrooms together this spring and this summer has been breakouts. So like, breakouts are incredibly helpful to get kids in there and then start talking with each other. Zoom's really good at this. Google Meet is looking to add that as well in the future, but I'm just gonna keep rolling. So these are my 5. And so I'm going to share my slides in a little bit, but these are my 5 elements of effective remote teaching. These are the things that I've learned from this summer. And I'm starting to curate a screening tool so you can actually look at a classroom and say what elements are there and what elements might be missing. Number 1, like, for it to be good remote teaching, it needs to be social. Like, kids have to talk. Kids have to talk to each other. Kids have to talk to you, and you have to talk to them. Now, I think one of the worst things we've done with COVID is call it social distancing. Like, it's not social distancing. Social distancing is if you were like, couldn't talk to anyone else. And that's not what we're doing. We're physical distancing because of COVID. And so it's really important that we are social in what we're doing. Like, I don't know what your family was like, but mine was, it was horrible when I couldn't see my relatives and we were separated from each other, and my parents are old and I can't physically go see them. What did I start doing? Like, I started setting up Zoom with my family so we could start connecting again socially, because we couldn't physically be there. Like, what do kids need? They need that social interaction, and they need that social and emotional support. Who else needs social support? Teachers. Teachers are incredibly scared right now. Like, they're scared not about like getting COVID, they're scared about not teaching in an effective way and building relationships with their kids when they go back to school. Like, the best thing you can do is give them time in their departments to talk to each other about what they're doing and to talk to other teachers. Like, they really, when I ran workshops this summer, and it's been for hundreds of teachers, they just need to talk to other teachers. Like, they really are, like you are, trying to figure this out alone, and it's really scary. Number 2, and so these are my 5 S's of remote teaching. I think we have to aspire to be as synchronous as we possibly can. Like, we have to aspire to have synchronous, meaningful sections so that we can actually do things together as a group. Now, I know that we're going to have asynchronous sections, but those should bridge synchronous sections. And when we're together in synchrony, it shouldn't just be one person talking. It should be a bunch of people talking, either in breakouts or through some kind of, we could use the chat or things like that. Next one, we have to lavish them with support. So we have to give them emotional and social support, but we also have to give them technology support. Like, the worst thing to do is to throw a bunch of tech at teachers and throw a bunch of tech at kids without showing them how to use it. every teacher in your school needs to make one video this year. Like every teacher should make at least one video this fall. And that should be, how does my remote teaching or remote classroom work? They need to make a video that explains how their online course works. So Kim made this for Sam. Like you made a screencast about how this virtual workshop's gonna work, how we're gonna use Zoom to connect. Like every teacher should make a very similar thing. And if you're in elementary, it should be for the teachers, or for the parents rather, explaining to them what remote teaching is going to look like. So support is incredibly important. And then the fourth S is standards. We have to go to our specific standards of our discipline. We're gonna lose time this year, and we don't have time to get distracted on other projects or do other things. Like we have to cut core to what the standards are. So I'm gonna talk about science today. I'm a science teacher and I work with the Next Gen or Montana's new science standards. You have to focus on those specific standards for two reasons. Like number one, you don't have time to go outside the standard and try new things because you're gonna be short on time. It might be like 1 or 2 days that you physically get them. Number two, it allows us to work together. So tomorrow I'm gonna do a workshop. This is gonna be in New York State, and all the science teachers in New York State are starting to organize these separate but together groups. And the teachers are coming together and say, let's build curriculum to the standards together. Let's form big Zoom group meetings and let's do this and let's tackle this together. It's impossible to do that if you're all doing different things. So it's really important that we focus on standards, and then we can start to crowdsource this and make it work a little bit more effectively. And then the last S is it has to be focused on the actual student. Like the role has to be individualized for those kids. Like those are the clients this fall, and we really have to do everything we can to support them. Now, one thing I heard a lot in the spring is we can't do these things. Like we can't have synchronous sections. We can't get kids online because it's an equity issue. What are we gonna do for all these other students? Like, I think we could argue that in the exact opposite. It's an equity issue if we aren't giving kids good remote teaching. Like we know what good remote lecture or remote teaching is, and it's not this. Here's a packet, first graders, good luck. Like that's never, ever, ever been good teaching. Like never. And so we can't let that be a year of that. My daughter's nannying, and that's what the kids were doing in the spring. Like, here's a packet, then good luck. With no social support, no emotional support. We can be so creative. Michelle says, can we use your 5S's screen in the chat? Of course, yeah. I'll put a link to all of the slides when I'm done. I got a little secret in here that I don't want to give away right away, but for sure. Another thing I'm working with New York tomorrow is a screener, a remote classroom screening tool. And so like, what are the top 10 things that are required in a good remote classroom? I'm gonna save the chat from today because you already gave me a bunch of those when I asked you for feedback. And so for sure, yeah, like I wanna share everything. But I wanna pivot for a second. I wanna pivot away from me being the presenter, and I wanna be your teacher for a bit. So I wanna show you what my classroom looked like when I was teaching. So this is me teaching a lesson. This is in Spain. I was teaching a chemistry lesson with some students in Spain. And so what does a good face-to-face classroom look like? A bunch of students and a bunch of teachers like engaged around a really cool, engaging phenomenon. So what does my classroom look like now? It looks like this. And so this is the setup that I have in my house here in Bozeman. And so I've been teaching a bunch of lessons. I taught some 3rd grade, middle school, high school lessons. And so this is kind of my layout. This is what my classroom looks like now. You have to kind of recreate the classroom that you had back in the day. And so before we get to that, I got to give you my quick motto. My motto is that when you're teaching, if you want to do good teaching, don't kill the wonder. And so what does that mean? Don't kill the wonder means, like, let's get specifically into what the wonder is. It's like a face you make. And so the wonder looks like this. So, or it looks like this, or it looks like this, or it looks like that, or it looks like that. And so the wonder is a face you make when you don't understand how something works, but you want to figure it out. And so right now I'm looking at Gary's face, and I'm looking at Kim's face, and I'm looking at Dale's face. So what I'm going to try to do is make your face look like this. And so this is something I figured out how to do. You just use a dry erase marker and you write on a plate, and then you pour water on it, and it looks like that. Now, Gary smiled. It's so fun to see you smile, Gary. So this is a phenomena that I would use in a chemistry class. Kids are going to be looking up stuff like this on YouTube anyway. So you have to find like very engaging things. This is what I would use to teach intermolecular forces in bulk structures. Or if we were to look at this, this is, I think this is in Norway. This went around Facebook a couple of weeks ago. Like, we're all in different places. You're all in your schools. I'm in my dining room, but we can all engage around a really cool thing that happened in Norway just using technology. This is something I did in my kitchen. I took the Olympic rings, I drew them with a ballpoint pen, and then I just released some termites onto it. And if you let termites go on a piece of paper when you've drawn the Olympic rings, what they'll do is they will just follow the rings forever until they die. Now, what I'm doing, I'm looking at Fort Benton Public Schools. If you haven't had a shot to look at Fort Benton Public Schools, I don't know, what's your name? Yeah, unmute for a sec.
I'm Roxy Benjamin.
Roxy, you have the most adorable family. Oh my
Thank
goodness.
you. They're loving your lessons right now.
That's great. Yeah. Like, all of them want to know, like, what's going on with the termites and what are they doing? Now, I would say this to you as a parent: the worst thing to do when your kids like see something cool like this, the worst thing to do is Google the answer to it. Like, if you Google the answer, you will have taught them that you can just look up the answer to anything by just looking on the internet. And what you'll do is you'll learn like one thing, but you'll really never learn how science works. So can you be with me? Like, let's not Google answers today. We're going to try to do some science, but Googling is cheating. Are you with me on that, Fort Benton Public Schools?
I love it. Absolutely. Okay. That sounds great.
All right. So let's dig in, and your kids can help a little bit.
Okay,
so I want to give you a teacher warning. So I'm about to become your teacher, and you're going to be my remote classroom, and we're going to work together, and we're going to try to figure out exactly what's going on. And so I'm going to change where I'm sitting now for a second. And so what I've done is, let me adjust this a little bit. So I'm using a document camera. And so I'm using a document camera so I can show you what's sitting in my house. And so let me keep going. And so, like, one of the best things that teachers can start to do to bust out of like a Zoom window is to just get a document camera. A document camera allows them to do the coolest things that they would normally do in the classroom, but we can do this just in the comfort of your house. Elementary teachers have done this forever, but a lot of secondary teachers didn't know that you could do this. And so it's something that you can kind of suggest to them. If they don't have a document camera, just use your phone and set it up. Now, what are we doing? I'm letting you sit around kind of my kitchen, and we're going to do a little bit of science. And so it's hard for me not to look at Fort Benton Public Schools. I'm going to do that. So I want to give you guys just a quick lesson. So this right here is a phenomena. A phenomena it's just a word we use in science that explains like what we're trying to figure out. And so what we're going to try to figure out together is something called a phenomena. What we're going to do is we're going to do an investigation. It's called an observational investigation. It's the most powerful tool that scientists have. And then the way we're going to think today is in patterns. And so we're going to learn some phenomena, we're going to do an investigation, and we're going to think in patterns. Now, if I was a math teacher, I would say, oh, we're going to learn some problem, and we're going to be doing some problem solving, and we're going to be thinking in maybe structural patterns. And so in anything we teach, if I'm teaching English or whatever, there should always be something I'm trying to figure out, something I'm doing, and then some way in which I'm thinking. And so let me move this out of the way and let's get a really cool phenomena. So what I've got here is, so I've got a beaker, and then I've got some vegetable oil. You could do this in your kitchen if you wanted to do this at home. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pour a little bit of vegetable oil in this beaker. Like that. Oops. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it. Let's see, like that. You could do this in your kitchen if you wanted to. Maybe this would be better if I put this behind it so you can see a little bit better. There we go. Ah, that's clear. Can you guys see that, Fort Benton? Give me thumbs up. Awesome, perfect. Okay, so what do we got in here? It's just vegetable oil. So this is just regular vegetable oil. And what I've got here is a test tube. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the test tube and I'm gonna put it in here. So I'm gonna put it in like that. Now, that is not very impressive. Hopefully you're not impressed by that. It's not very cool. So if you were watching, students, like we've got a beaker with some oil in it, I put a test tube in it, and then you can see it. But what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to fill up the tube with a little bit more vegetable oil. And so what I want you to do is just watch the tube on the inside as we pour some vegetable oil in it. Now, I don't know if you saw that, but the tube, like the tube will disappear. So the tube was there, but now the tube disappears. So it's invisible. So let's go back to this for a second. And let me get a video of that. So even though your teachers might not have like a document camera in their house, they could just video things that they're doing, or they could go in nature and visit things. So as you pour vegetable oil in it, the tube will just literally like vanish. It disappears, and it gets better than that. So like when I take and put another test tube in vegetable oil, watch what happens right when I stick it in. It'll just disappear. It's like magic. It disappears. And so I posted this on TikTok, which my daughter, I didn't even know was a thing. So like she showed me how TikTok works, and I put a video, I think it's the one on the left. I put it on TikTok, and it has like 1 million+ views. Because kids just try to figure out stuff and are interested in how the world works and how it works. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna help me right now. So I need everybody to help me on this. And what we're gonna do is we are going to start typing in the chat things that you notice. So what I want you to start typing in the chat are, what are some things that you observe as you watch this video? And I want everybody to play. So what I want you to do is, just as you watch this video, what are some things that you're observing in the video? And then I'll kind of relay those back to the group. What are some things that you observe? Oh, don't feel like you have to impress people with how smart you are. Like, who cares? Just tell me what you observe. The volume of the oil goes up. The test tube disappears. Christy, thank you. Like, the test tube's disappearing. I think that's great. The oil level goes up in volume. Mike Perry notices that it's really, really cool. The cup gets filled up. I'm watching the tube disappear. Carla says, I noticed I could see the test tube when the oil is taken out. Linda Marsh says that it goes to the bottom before it ever disappears. The color is the same above and below. Jeff Blessum says the engagement is, oh, I lost it. It just went off. Let's do this for a second. So Kirk, do you mind unmuting for a second? And Kim, do you mind unmuting for a second? And Dale, do you mind unmuting for a second? So what are some things you're observing, Kirk? And I just want to hear you talk for a second. What are some things you notice as you watch it?
So I'm watching, I believe it has something to do with the color, because as the colors become the same, it gives the appearance that the glass disappears, basically.
Gotcha. So like if I were to go back to the lesson, like let's just observe. So what are some observations that you make, Kirk? Before you get to it explaining me how it works, what are some things you notice? What are some observations that you're making?
Might be the video that's choppy a little bit, but it doesn't happen immediately.
It goes like right away, like
Right.
that one. You're talking about the one on the right, Kirk?
On
Like,
the right. Yep.
yeah, do you see when it goes in, it all of a sudden like disappears, but not right away? Kim, what's something that you're observing?
I noticed that the test tube disappears at a perfectly parallel line to the base of the beaker.
Gotcha. What about you, Dale? What are some things that you're observing?
Well, I noticed that when you pour oil in the beaker doesn't disappear. But then when you pour the oil into the test tube that's inside the beaker, the test tube seems to disappear.
That's such a great, Dale, that's such a good observation. Like the point of doing this at the beginning is allowing everybody in the class right now to kind of be Dale for a second or to be Kirk for a second, like to engage in the phenomena. And it doesn't matter that we're all in different places. Like we're all trying to figure this out together. What could ruin it right now if somebody Googled it? Like if somebody were to look on the internet, why when you pour oil in a tube inside a beaker does it disappear? Like we would have just learned one thing, but we would never learn anything about how science works or science writ large. If I were to go back to this, let me go back to this. This lesson, if you remember, I go back to what we're trying to do. Let me zoom out for a second. So this right here is called the phenomena. It's what we're trying to understand. We've done a good job, I think, class so far as doing an observational investigation. But what I really want you to start thinking is about patterns. And so patterns is a really powerful way to think about science. So patterns are anything you notice, and there are lots of different patterns that we could have. If I were to turn this, oops, if I were to dig in a little bit more deeply, it could be patterns of what we see, it could be patterns of what we feel, it could be patterns of change over time. So let me throw this out to the chat for a second. Could you write an observation in the chat that has the word patterns in it? So I want you to write an observation in the chat that has the word patterns in it. I want you to think in patterns. And again, patterns are anything that we notice, anything that we notice. What are some observations you could make that are related to the word patterns? And I'll just relay those back to you. Don't feel like you have to impress people with being smart. Just be wrong and be fast and wrong. So David Wick noticed there's a pattern in disappearance is the same each time. Each time it repeats, David is noticing that it's always repeating in a similar way. Pam Pettigrew notices the tube disappearing in a pattern. What are some other things? Relationships could be patterns. We could see patterns in structure. This is, Courtney Bake is so bright. Would the pattern be the same if it wasn't a sphere, but if it was a square? That's fantastic. Mike said, I like the pattern of your shirt. Thank you, Mike. It's always gonna be plaid. Let's see. One thing Casey noticed is I'm noticing a pattern in the structure. So the beakers and the test tubes are both cylinders. There's a pattern of color. I think Kirk was even saying that at the beginning. That we noticed that they're a similar color and that maybe that has something to do with it and why it's not changing. So if you're my class, like eventually you're like, okay, let's get to it. Science guy, let's figure out exactly what do we think is going on. And so what I'm gonna do is post this in the chat. I'm gonna post let's put this there. I'm gonna post a web address in the chat. And then let me do that again so that you can just click on it. Oops, just give me a second. And let me try this. Okay, I just posted a link in the chat. Could you click on that for a second? Can you get a thumbs up if that was able to clickable? Did that work? The link in the chat, were you able to click on that or not? It's not working. All right. Oh, I sent that just to Michelle McCarthy. Sorry. I am an idiot. Let me try that again. Let's do this. Does that show up, Kirk? Are you getting that now? Sorry about that. So let's take a look there for a second. Yeah, Pam says, been there, Paul. Everybody is like, who's been on Zoom is the most, yeah, compassionate people to understand what this is to remote teach. So now that it's there, what I'd like you to do is I want you to take a formative assessment for me. So what I'd like you to do is fill out that form. I won't show anybody your name. Nobody will see what you're thinking or what you're wondering about. But what I want you to do in that form is I want you to put together like what are you wondering about? So if I were to share the screen, so basically to show you what I'm really wanting you to do. So I'd like you to fill out this form right here. So put your name in it. What do you wonder? And then what do you think? Your name's required. You need to give me at least one question. And then I also want you to tell me what you think. And then when you're done, just smile and give me a thumbs up after you've submitted your form. Perfect. Okay, I posted another thing in the chat. So this is where you can start to see what everybody else in the class is wondering and what everybody else is thinking. So in science, what we're starting to call these things would be a driving question board. And so a driving question board is going to be like what drives all the inquiry that we're going to start to do in the class. So I can see things on the left. Why is there a difference in the first three pictures? Why does the test tube disappear? Is this repeatable with different liquids? Could you do it with other things? So like these first columns, 1, 2, and 3, if I were to say, what are you doing? Like, I'm gonna hold this card up for a second. You're asking questions. So you're asking questions about like the phenomena itself. What is the fourth column about? It's what you think. So the first person thinks that I am a magician. That's interesting. Next person thinks the color of oil is and the color of the oil in the tube and the beaker is why it disappears. This person thinks Pyrex and oil have similar refractive frequencies. This person thinks the oil blocks the light, so it disappears. Maybe it's because of the same colors. So like what this starts to represent is this is the whole class, like what we all start to wonder and what we all start to think. So what I'm doing is by introducing the phenomena at the beginning and just giving you times to wonder and giving you times to think, like hopefully I'm bringing you into a part of this experiment. Like the idea is that we're all starting to work together. And I think this is what Karine says. I hope I'm saying that the right way, or Karen. It's very engaging. It brings us into it's like bringing the entire class in to what we're doing. Like when it comes to remote teaching, the best thing you can do is make sure that it starts going both ways. Like the person who's talking a lot of the time is the person who is learning, but now the fact that you were able to ask your questions here, like now you're starting to become a part of the process. If we have any science teachers on here, in the new science standards, we use words called cross-cutting concepts to think about science in different ways. So when I set up this this Google form, I started to color different things based on the words that you're using. So this person is talking about matter, and this is matter. Some of these are about cause and effect. So I can even start to color the questions you're asking to show like what types of questions you're wondering about and what questions might be maybe we underrepresenting in certain areas. And so let me stop that for a second and let's go back to figuring this out. So let's go back to Kurt. Can you see my messy desk again? Can you see this okay? Or not? Let's see. Stop. Let me share the right thing again. So what I'm trying to do is share. Kurt, can you see like my hands over here in these cards? Perfect. Alrighty. Okay, so let's figure this thing out. So we've got a bunch of ideas, but let's play. So Kirk, Fort Benton, Dale, what are some experiments you want me to do? I've got a bunch of equipment right here in my house. What would you like to do?
Use something besides oil.
Okay, all right.
With different viscosity.
Something with a different viscosity. So like water, would that be all right?
Sure.
Okay, cool. All right. So let's do that. Let me add another tube. Did you ever teach science? Kirk, did you ever teach science?
Freshman chemistry for 1 year. Scary.
Gotcha. All right, so let's try, I'm gonna add water to it. Does that sound good? I don't know, what did that do? So the tube is made, now the beaker has got oil in it and now it's got water on the inside. What'd you learn from that, Kirk?
Yeah, didn't disappear.
Didn't disappear, yeah. What would you want to do next? You can either type it in the chat if you want me to do an experiment, or you can just unmute and let me know. What next, Kirk? What should we do?
So how about water in the beaker and water in the test tube?
There you go.
Water in the beaker and in the test tube. That'd be great. Yeah, I might have to dump this out for a second. What do you think is going to happen then? What are you thinking, Kurt?
I think it'll disappear, just like
Gotcha.
oil on oil.
You ready for it?
Ready.
Still there. Sorry, man. What else? What if you put food coloring in the oil in the tube? Calais is saying that. So let's go back to that. So I've got a beaker with a test tube with oil in it, and then we're putting it in there. And oil, what you're saying, Calais, is let's put food coloring in it? Is that what you're saying? Let's do that.
Yes, Paul, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Red, okay with you?
Whatever's handy.
Oh, that's bizarre. Are you getting that?
Yeah, that's really cool.
I don't know if you saw that. It's like the tube's gone, but I can see the dye, I think is what I'm seeing. What next do we want to do? Dish soap in best, and maybe Michelle is thinking its density has something to do with it. It's like a lava lamp, Lynn Peterson says. So it's not about the right answer. I hope that you're understanding that. Like, what am I trying to model here? I'm trying to model like what does good remote teaching look like? And now, like, one thing that's apparent is that we might have to dig in a little bit more deeper. I'm seeing Allison say it has something to do about light refraction. So now we could dig into that. So Allison Robertus, could you unmute for a second? Allison.
Hi.
Yeah, tell us what you're thinking.
Well, I'm thinking because the oil is so dense that maybe the light isn't reflecting back as much, and so maybe with the water, it's able to refract or reflect back, so therefore you can see both.
Gotcha. So what do you teach, Allison?
I'm a principal here at the kindergarten.
Nice. So like the one thing that I think like right now that we're struggling with from a remote teaching perspective would be like, how can Allison show us what she's thinking? Are you guys picking up on that? Like her voice is helpful, but it's really hard for us to see what she's thinking. So to show you what I would normally do, so if we had time or given time, so let's try to share this screen, is we could use technology at this point. So this is a Jamboard. I don't know if anybody is using Jamboard or similar things. So in this one, so this is we were working with teachers when we were doing this one, but allowing them to do experiments in their house and start to like, what happened in my kitchen if I do this? What happened in trying out different experiments? We could also start to do simulations. So we could test your idea, Allison, of like reflection and refraction. So there's so many simulations out there that you could start to use. There's online data sets that we could do. Like the whole idea is that we have to take everything that we used to do in the classroom, and then we have to find a way to do it remotely. The one thing you don't hear me talk a lot about is the technology. If we were to go back to Paul's like 5 S's, like I think technology can get in the way sometimes. Like first of all, we have to figure out what do we need to do, which is like, let's get social, let's work together, let's be synchronous. And then once we've done that, let's figure out how to start finding the tools that help us do that. So Allison's question, are Jamboards interactive? Yeah, so like the nice thing about a Jamboard is I could give you all access to the Jamboard and we all could be working on the same thing. Drawing at the same time, like uploading pictures at the same time. It doesn't take that much now. The tech tools are out there. If you're really looking for somebody in your class or in your school to drive this, find your flipped classroom teacher or your blended learning teacher and just like have them do little PD or professional learning for your teachers in your school. There have been a group of teachers that have been working on this for the last 10 years around blended learning or flipped classroom, and that could give you a lot more like advice as far as that goes. Another good Clay's idea of talking to your librarian or integration specialist would be super important at this time. I'm not talking to teachers though, I'm talking to leaders. And one thing I've learned over the last 6 years is no one hires you to come into their school and just talk about what it is to be a teacher. Like, the only time you get hired as a consultant is if you can make change in a school. And so for me, the best thing that makes change in the school is like going to the standards themselves. Like talking to your teachers and saying, how are you addressing these standards remotely? And if you can't do that, like what can I do to support you in this way? Like always going back to the standards, always going back to the data, I think is always super important. I've got about 5 minutes left and I would love to open it up for questions in the last 5 minutes, questions you might have about remote teaching. You can ask me the questions in the chat if you want to, or if you just want to unmute and fire away. The one thing I guess I have offer to you is that I've been remote teaching for the last 5 or 6 months. And so I've got a little bit of expertise, I would say. What questions might you have? Perfect. So Allison's question is, what's the best way to create new relationships with students? I would say to teachers, or I've been telling teachers, like number one, make a video for your students that show how your class works. But number two, just make a 5-minute video that explains who you are as a person. Like all kids want to know is and going back to what Hal said before, like does this person know who I am? And do they even care about me? Like it's all about relationships. A lot of teachers are worried that kids can't form relationships based on just remote connections. And that's just not true. Kids build these authentic relationships remotely. It's a part of like Generation Z. It's just how they live. And so you just kind of have to step into that world. My advice to you would be just be honest and just like share, like sharing like what you're interested in or what your passions are, I think is important. How do we help our teachers gain self-confidence in teaching remotely? I've made videos recently. One is on how I make screencasts and another one on how I'm teaching remotely. I'm doing a bunch of professional learning this summer and in the fall on what remote teaching looks like. No one knows, there's not any research on what effective remote teaching looks like. If somebody tells you there is, there isn't. There's a lot of research on online teaching and what good online teaching looks like and blended learning, but remote teaching is new. And so I would say giving them time to talk to other teachers. I've got some resources. I added a new video or a new website called My Learning Spot where we're putting on some professional learning, but like having them present to each others, I think would be important, giving them time to meet. Also, Michelle's point is really well said. You should make a video explaining who you are and what you do, but also have your kids do something similar. Like as you start to know them, like a quick 1-minute video of like, this is what I'm passionate about, this is what I do. I'm working with a school in Moscow and they surveyed the kids this spring and asked them like what was most effective and what was least effective. And what their students reported back, well, first of all, let me tell you what the teachers said. The teachers said the remote teaching was not effective. It was not helpful and it was not worth it. Like by and large, the majority of them did. What did the students say? The exact opposite of that. The kids said the remote sessions, the Zoom meetings were the most important thing. And it's just, there's a weird disconnect. I think teachers feel uncomfortable in teaching in this new way because they've never done it before. I honestly, in March, felt like I was that first year teacher 26 years ago in Guilford, Montana. I didn't know how to do it. I had to go meet other people and somebody said, use a document camera or get a whiteboard in your house and like, we'll figure it out. Like we always will figure out a way to do it, but you have to give us time and you have to give us support. I'm gonna save the chat so I have some of your great ideas in there. I do wanna say one thing that this is just to wrap it all up and also to just give props to Kirk. Kirk, I wanted to say just thank you for having me today. Thanks for letting me be a part of this. But I wanna put my teacher hat on for a second and you won't ever remember these things, but Kirk, a couple of times in my teaching career, just sent me emails that are like, I saw what you did and that was great. Or you came to my office once and said like, Paul, I really value the work that you're doing. Like, that's all teachers are looking for. Just like do something and give them a little validation of it. Like if I wouldn't have had superintendents like you and Rob, I wouldn't have done the things that I've done because you don't feel that support. And I think what teachers need now is support to try things that might not work. It fails, but who cares? Let's figure it out tomorrow, and just giving them support to do that. I also feel so much empathy for you. I can't believe probably the last few months of your lives and what it's been like. I super appreciate whatever you're trying to do to help support students in Montana. You can always reach out to me if you have other questions, but Kirk, and to all of you, thank you so much. Heartfelt thanks from me. And yeah, let's go eat lunch.
Paul, thank you so much. Silent round of applause, everybody. That was terrific.
It was like this.
Yeah, so we are going to wrap up. Thanks to everyone today for making it a success. That's our presenters, the SAM office team, Kurt, Gary, and Kim, and everybody who was brave enough to have their video on most of the time so they could be seen and engaged. Remember to complete your evaluations for the sessions you attended today. And if you watch some of them this afternoon, you can complete evaluations and get credit for those as well. Many of you will continue the SAM Administrator Institute tomorrow with the Instructional Leadership Summit. We'll begin with introduction, welcome at 8 a.m. and then we'll hear from Jamie Vollmer, also followed by 2 more focus breakout sessions. Big shout out again to the SAM business partners for their participation in the Instructional Leadership Summit. And don't forget that you can always swing by their virtual booths and have a look to see what they can do to support education and teaching and leadership in the state of Montana. So Thanks again to everyone, and we will see you all tomorrow unless anybody from the office has something more to add.
From the office, thank you, Dale, for your introductory remarks and being president of SAM and taking on this responsibility. And thank you to our presenter, Paul, and to Hal Bowman, and to the other breakout session presenters. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you all tomorrow.